Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. We have a lot to talk about with Clutter. My name's Kumar Venkateswar. I'm one of the program managers in the Clutter team. I've previously worked in a few other areas of Exchange, high availability, storage, search, and I have to say that Clutter is one of the most different features that I've worked on that Microsoft has attempted, and it sort of brings together some of the things that Satya talked about in the keynote, and I'd like to share that information with you. So to start with, let's talk about what Clutter is and what are the motivations that we had for developing this feature. And I'll present some of the sort of marketing factoids for why we want to develop this kind of feature. I'll talk about how it works, and this is brand new content about how it works, so I would appreciate if you guys asked questions towards the end. I'll make sure to leave time towards the end if there's anything that you guys didn't understand or want clarification on. I'm happy to answer those questions. I'll also talk about how users control the feature and how we light it up and make it friction-free for users to turn on and to use. This is one of the features that we've developed in a way that users can easily turn it on, and they can use it across all of their devices and across all of their clients. And it's unique in a way compared to any of the other features that I've worked on, in that we decided that we would be able to do it in a way that was client independent. Of course, we know that we can't have a feature that addresses users' issues without addressing the concerns that organizations have around compliance and control and so on. So I'll spend some time talking about the features that we added based on your feedback as a community during the course of the release in order to make it work for organizations in addition to users. Then I'll talk about what the result is. So kind of a spoiler at the end, we basically end up saving a lot of time across a lot of users. And this is something that is, in my mind, a phenomenally successful feature in terms of increasing user productivity. For my mailbox alone, we're talking about hundreds of dollars saved to Microsoft in terms of the amount of time that I don't have to spend going through Clutter in my mailbox. And I'll talk about futures. So there's some exciting stuff. I even have a little bit of a bit about a feature that got checked in less than 2 weeks ago. So it's a feature where Clutter as an area is something that we're checking things in and deploying things on a weekly basis. It's something that's a very fast-moving area, and I'd like to share the most up-to-date information that we have and things that you're likely to see within the next few weeks to months. So to start with, what's Clutter, and what are we trying to solve? So if any of you, how many of you actually were able to attend the Exchange 2016 on-premises talk? So you might have heard Kareem mention that 30% of time is spent managing email. This is very similar information. It's the same kind of thing, and we're trying to address it in a few different ways. Kareem was talking about how we address it with search and how we make search more efficient, and that was something that I've worked on in the past. In this case, we're actually trying to make it so that the information that users are looking for is readily available, and the information that's not important to them is moved out of the way so that they can quickly and easily process the information that's in their inboxes. So in spite of the fact that they spend so much time managing email and searching for information, the statistics are that 62% of information workers just can't find the information that they're looking for. It's just not an efficient way of looking for information if they have these big piles of needles in this large haystack. So the problem that we're trying to address with Clutter is to make that easier for them to manage and to find information. So how do we do this? Basically, we say that people miss the information that they care about, and part of it is because of this constant flow of email, the constant overwhelming flow of email. By making sure that we understand well what people's emails habits are and learn it continuously, Clutter helps prioritize what's important to the end user by moving that clutter out of their inbox. So that's the basic premise of it. What is clutter? Well, it's the stuff that users are not likely to read right now. And this is something that's very highly personalized. It varies from user to user. It's not like junk, where if you take junk, 9 out of 10 people will agree that something is junk. Clutter is something that's very personalized. And I'll tell a story about how Clutter worked for me in my mailbox. When I moved from the search team to the Clutter team, even when I was in the search team, I was pretty connected to what the Clutter team was doing, because we view search and Clutter as trying to solve the same problem in 2 different ways. And I was still subscribed to all of the DLs for both search and Clutter. And I had a series of complex rules that would move all of the information around Clutter out of my mailbox or into separate folders so that I wouldn't have to look at them all the time. And what occasionally happened was there would be questions that were asked of me because of the connection between search and Clutter that I wasn't aware of. So people would say, hey, you should look at this email because it's something that's relevant to you. So I ended up, in spite of these pretty complex set of rules, I ended up missing things that were important to me. When I moved into the Clutter team and I turned Clutter on, what immediately happened was that all of the Clutter information was still going to my Clutter folder. And within a couple of weeks, after training the system and saying, hey, you know what, the search information is now Clutter, and the Clutter information is now something that needs to be delivered into my inbox, the system eventually learned within that couple of weeks or so, and I'm able to look at not just all of the information about Clutter, but still the search information that's specifically relevant to my current role. So even for an individual, if you change your role or you do something different, mail that is not Clutter can become Clutter, and mail that is Clutter can become not Clutter. And Clutter understands that there's some dynamics to what Clutter is. And that's the way we think about Clutter as a feature. So who are the target users for Clutter? Consumers, again, are pretty well addressed by junk. There's some potential for having personalized sorting out of email, but for the most part, you have a set of gray mail that's pretty common among all the users. You can have a feature that works for all users pretty well, but at work, the patterns are completely different from person to person and vary over time. So we're looking to address the problem that information workers have. It's also best for high volume users and the ones that don't have rules. So there's people who have a pile of information in their inbox. They have a bunch of email that's unread. I can think of some coworkers of mine that literally before Clutter had thousands of emails in their inbox that would just sit there unread. clogging up information. And as you search through information, you put in 1 or 2 keywords, that's the behavior of people, it would bring up a whole bunch of unread, irrelevant information because it's sitting there in the inbox. And if you, for this type of user that's overwhelmed by the information, that doesn't have an ability to have these big, long list of rules, complicated rules, Clutter will help sort out the information that's most relevant to them. Of course, ultimately, you guys decide. It's the individuals and organizations that can decide whether Clutter is the feature for that end user or not. Over the course of time, we're actually going to proactively enable users that we think will benefit from the feature. But all users can say, you know what, that's not for me. That's not something I want an automated system deciding for me. And admins can decide the same way, and the system will not override those decisions. So after we've had about 6 months of the feature, plus if you include the amount of time that it was deployed to Microsoft and early adopters, what do users say? The vast majority of users are very, very happy with the feature. And I've got some of the quotes here. The one that really stands out for me is the one that says, "It works like a charm, saves me at least 20 minutes a day." I mean, 20 minutes a day is huge, huge. It basically makes it worth deploying Office 365 just by this one feature. So I was really encouraged to see comments like that. So we'll go into how Clutter works in a little bit of detail. Okay, so what does it do? You basically have these 2 sets of operations that happen. There's a personalized model that gets developed, and that personalized model is applied towards all of the email that comes in. So at the very high level. And what is this personalized model? What we basically look at is we look at the email and look at specific features of the email. Who sent it? Was it high importance? Are you on the to line? How many senders are there? So we look at features of the email, and then we look at the actions that were taken on the email. Did you read it, or did you reply to it? Or did you just leave it unread and ignored? Did you leave it unread and delete it? In addition, did you move it to the Clutter folder? So moving into the Clutter folder, of course, is a very definitive action. Leaving it unread is less so. But we come up with this learning summary. And we say, this set of features is likely to lead to this action. So once we have that, we look at the mail that's coming in, and we say, OK, we need to look at this set of features, because these are the features that will let us discriminate between something that you're likely to take an action on, read, reply, and so on, or will you treat it like clutter and just ignore it? So if it's something that you'll treat as clutter, we'll move it off out of the inbox to a separate area where you don't have to look at it right away. That's the basic set of what we do. A little more detail on that, so we can talk a little bit about classification. Just technical terminology, it's a Bayesian probit regression model. What that basically means is that we try and develop a model where we multiply a feature value times a weight to get an overall score. So it's a sum of product type of score. And we calculate the score for every email that goes through. Once we calculate those weights, we compare the clutter score to a personalized threshold. So we've got a personalized set of weights that we calculate on an email. We calculate a clutter score that is unique to the end user, and we compared that to a threshold that's also unique to the end user. And what we end up doing with that is we infer an action that you would take. So would you read, would you reply, and so on? Would you treat it as clutter? And that's the way we decide whether something is clutter or not. And similarly, the online training is what actually generates that set of weights and generates the threshold. So the first step is train on a set of historical data. And the reason we train on a set of historical data is because we assume that it takes a certain amount of time for a user to act on an email. So supposing we said, hey, we'll train on everything that's a day old. We'll give you a day to act on it. That means that weekends are something that would end up generating a lot of clutter because you wouldn't act on it within a day because it's on the weekend. You're not as responsive to email. We wanted to make sure that we didn't take those into account. So we train on emails that are older than a certain period, something like a week, and we compute the features, observe the action that you take on the message, and calculate the weights that are based on the combination of the feature values and the action. So we talked about weights here. The other piece of it is the threshold. How do we decide what a threshold is? The threshold is basically decided on the basis of the experience that we would provide to the end user based on that given value. So you can think of the threshold as a percentage of email that would end up in the clutter folder. It isn't exactly that, but it's something very similar to that. And the way we measure these features is in terms of the technical terms for that are precision and recall. Recall is the percentage of the clutter that we actually put into the clutter folder. So a good experience means, in our mind, we remove at least 50% of the clutter. And precision is the percentage of things that we classify as clutter that really are clutter. So if you kind of look at the curves, there's some chance that we'll make a mistake and that we'll classify something as clutter when it's not really clutter. And we view it as we shouldn't make a mistake more than 15% of the time. In practice, it's actually much lower than that. So based on those two values, we end up with a personal threshold range that's calculated to the individual user. And Clutter chooses a threshold that's somewhere in that shaded zone that provides the user with a good experience. So how do users control clutter? Clutter is something that's very personal, and users should have full control over it. It calculates all of these things personally. How do you tell the system as a user what is clutter? How do you tell it what's not clutter? And how do you turn the classification on and off? If you're not happy with the way it works for whatever reason, if it's not working for you, then a user should be able to turn it off. Or if they feel overwhelmed and this is something that they think can help them, then they should be able to turn it on. So the way we looked at this, and the term Satya used in the keynote is mobility of experience. We wanted to make sure that Clutter worked regardless of client. And in every client, it actually works in every client. It works in all of the current Microsoft clients, whether it's Outlook, Outlook on the web, Outlook for iOS, but it'll even work in the Android email client, the iOS default email client. It'll work with Outlook 2010. This was one of our design goals, and we wanted to make sure that we brought the experience to everybody. How does that lead to some of the user experience decisions that we made? So we looked at a few different ways. If you if you look at some of the email clients, including Outlook for iOS, actually, it has a tab that it puts the Clutter email into. And for the way we developed the Clutter feature, and because of the design goal, we decided that the folder metaphor was the best thing for us to be able to have as wide a reach as possible. So because all clients understand folders, we made sure that that would be the way that we communicated to the client that something is Clutter, communicated to the user that something is Clutter. We moved things out of the inbox and into the Clutter folder. We actually, during the course of developing the feature, looked at a few alternative ways of doing this. And it turns out this is really the best way if you want to get reach across all of the population that we were looking to address. In order for the user to tell the system definitively that something is Clutter, they can move messages from the inbox to the Clutter folder, and we will treat that as true Clutter. At the end of the day, the user decides, and it's, the system has to guess on some of the things where we don't have such a clear signal. But if a user moves something to the Clutter folder, that is definitely Clutter, and all of the messages that look like that are Clutter. And similarly, if they move a message from the Clutter folder to the inbox, that is definitely not Clutter, and all messages that have similar features should not move to the Clutter folder. So that's the way we look at user signals. The other thing that we do that was kind of developed on the basis of backward compatibility and compatibility across clients is the use of inbox notifications in order to communicate with the user. So when they turn the feature on, for instance, we have to be able to tell them, hey, the feature is on. We have to be able to tell them, hey, you know what, there's things going into the Clutter folder, you should know about this. Traditionally, we've said, we're going to develop features for the latest client, and we can do things like changing the user interface. We can have various kinds of things. I'll talk about what we did for Clutter in a couple of slides. But we basically only had inbox notifications similar to how quota messages work, similar to how delivery status notifications work. That was the lowest common denominator way for us to make sure that we were able to tell the user when Clutter was doing something that they should be aware of, or whether they should take actions in order to help Clutter out. If users are using non-web clients, we had links within these inbox notifications that they can use to provide feedback to us that tell us whether we were doing the right thing, whether we were moving things, whether they felt like they needed to turn it off, and to perform other actions. So in addition to the notifications themselves, one of the features that we had to develop was the ability to deep link into the options page in Outlook Web App. Under the covers, this goes to Outlook Web App. But even if a user is using, for instance, the iOS client and they see an inbox notification, they can click on the links within the notification and take actions as if this is something that's integrated in with the iOS client. Of course, premium clients, we have the ability to do premium features and basically make the experience the way that we want it to be. We have right-click menus. We have the option of pop-outs, so you can see what if it's not Clutter, and we have these little snippets of information that tell the user how to interact with the feature and so on. And that's true of both Outlook 2016 as well as Outlook on the web. So let me go ahead and demo what this looks like. Okay, so here I have a user with, as it so happens, with Clutter turned on. So you see that there's a Clutter folder. Supposing we say the email from Kip is actually Clutter, they have the ability to right-click and move it to Clutter. So I can move it to Clutter, and it'll go into the Clutter folder. And if you see there, it's something that is treated as Clutter. The first time that the user goes to the Clutter folder after the Clutter feature is turned on, they actually see this pop-out that says, what if it's not Clutter, and kind of explains it, has a link to learning more, to the help page. And if they right-click on it here, they can move it back to the inbox to tell the system that it's not Clutter. In addition to that, if they right-click on the folder, and this goes for both Outlook 2016 as well as Outlook on the web, they can go to Clutter settings directly, in addition to looking at the settings gear. And they have the ability to turn Clutter on and off, meaning that they can turn on the ability to separate items as Clutter, or to tell the system not to separate items identified as Clutter. And it also has some links to help and providing feedback. So let's go back to the presentation. So we talked about how users can control Clutter and tell Clutter what they consider Clutter and what they consider not Clutter, and how to turn it on and off. But in addition to users, admins need to be able to control Clutter as well for reasons that are important to the organization. And these were things, honestly, that we developed after admins such as some of you out there gave us feedback that these were things that were essential for organizations in order to deploy the feature and have it widely used within their organizations. So one of the things that we added in after November is the creation of retention tags. So if there's this information that's going off to a separate folder and is not really being paid attention to, it's natural for organizations to want to be able to define retention policies on that folder that are separate from the inbox. So we developed a feature so that you have the ability to do exactly that, to set a separate retention policy for the Clutter feature, or for the Clutter folder, I mean. In addition to that, so funny story about this. When we first launched Clutter within Microsoft, I got an email from one of Satya's communication staff saying, hey, you know what? We sent out this broadcast email to a large set of Microsoft users, and we saw that there was a really low response rate on this email. And we're trying to understand why, and it turns out that this went into the Clutter folder. So how do we make sure that this doesn't happen to Satya's email? And we recognize at that point it's not just Satya's email. It's things like HR communication, benefits communication, legal communication, standards of business conduct, various things that are important to the organization. It might go into the Clutter folder just because the Clutter feature thinks that the end user is unlikely to read it, but for the organization, it's pretty important that it be in front of them, even if they choose to ignore it. So essential organizational communication such as that can bypass Clutter processing. And the way we implemented that and the way we figured would be the right paradigm for implementing it is to use transport rules. So if you set up a transport rule based on whatever criteria that are appropriate for this type of organizational communication and add the header. It's XMS Exchange Organization Bypass Clutter. If you set that header on it, Clutter will bypass Clutter processing and make sure that that goes into the inbox. It doesn't mean that the end user wouldn't have rules that would move it off somewhere else. We don't touch rules, but Clutter itself will ignore that email and put it into the inbox. The other piece of feedback we got was end users look at these inbox notifications and they can't tell the difference between that and phishing attacks. So the features that we've developed, and we've added in the ability to brand it with the organization's IT brand. So that way end users can recognize that these communications are actually coming from the system, they're legitimate communications, and they're branded with whatever IT brand that the organization needs on these notifications. So today, the things that can be customized are the display name and the logo. One of the features that I was alluding to that was checked in very recently is a reply to address. So currently, the way inbox notifications work, they can't be replied to because there is no reply to address set. They originate in the system. They basically get deposited into the inboxes. They're not really emails, even though they kind of look like them for the purposes of the client. But if there is a need for the organization to add the reply to address so they can communicate straight to help desk, this is something that we added in order to make that possible. So let me go ahead and demo how that works and how that looks like. Okay, so we're back here. So if we look at the mailboxes that we have, I've already connected to PowerShell as an administrator. So I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. So if we look at the branding mailbox, the branding mailbox's alias is Contoso IT in this case. And we can look at the display name and the email addresses, because those are the key for identifying the branding mailbox. It actually has a specific email address within the tenant that's used to identify it as a branding mailbox. So if you see, the tenant name is actually Groups at Ignite, and there's this special GUID mailbox. That GUID is the one that actually we use to identify that mailbox as being the branding mailbox. So what we can do is we can change that display name and we'll say set mailbox, Contoso IT, and then set that display name to so we'll set it to demo Contoso IT. And then I'll switch back to the user mailbox. When a user first turns the clutter separation, the clutter classification on, they actually receive a notification that confirms that this separation is actually happening and gives them a link to turn it off if they have second thoughts. And that particular notification is branded. So we'll say don't separate at first, and then we'll say separate, which puts that notification into the inbox. And we'll go look at the inbox. And you see that there's a notification there that has demo Contoso IT on it. So similarly, you can also do a picture import in order to change a logo that appears at the bottom, which for some reason is displaying the alternate text. But you can also change the reply to, or you will be able to change the reply to address as well. And we use that special mailbox as the way to communicate to the system that that's the branding information that should be used. The other thing about that mailbox is it doesn't require a license, which I know is a concern that some of you had. Obviously, you don't want to be using a license in order to have branding on notifications. So let's go ahead and talk about what the results of this are. So I alluded to it earlier, but I thought that Clutter is a phenomenally successful feature in terms of saving user time. We sort out millions of emails per day as Clutter. We're rolling out non-English language support. It's because of the way that we do the inbox notifications, it's been something of a challenge because we have these big, long notifications. It's pretty hard to localize everything. We're 4 languages away from supporting every language in Office 365. So that support is coming out soon. But if you look at the amount of time that we've saved users across Office 365, the average user saves over 80 minutes a month, and 10% of users are saving over 168 minutes a month. I mean, that's a crazy, crazy amount of time that ends up getting saved by some users. And by the heaviest email users, and probably the ones that are hardest to support, they end up saving a lot of time because of the emails that end up getting moved out of their inbox. They're able to find information so much easier. So what's next? Clutter is a feature that's still in progress. It's still something that we're continuing to make improvements to. It's still something that it's not something that we can call done and signed and sealed. What do we have next? So up to this point, we've tried to get users to opt in through various inbox notifications and things like that in order to make sure that we're getting a slow ramp of users and to make sure that as many users as possible turn it on voluntarily. So if users turn the feature on voluntarily and they have a full awareness of it, they end up having a better experience with the feature. So we wanted to make sure that we got as many users to turn the feature on as possible. But at the same time, there's a lot of people out there that are so overwhelmed that they're not even able to react to that email to turn this feature on. So we've started piloting default enablement, where some Microsoft users, some selected organizations in first release, they've already been enabled by default. And we've looked at those users, and the vast majority of those users, as the other users, are happy with the feature, are getting time savings from the feature, and are not turning it off. So this is, we look at that population, that pilot population, and we say, well, we've got this great experience, we've got this great time savings experience. We need to make sure that we try and enable it for everyone. However, if we try and enable it for everyone, there are some changes that we need to make in order to make it work for the entire population. So one of the things that we got of feedback from a small set of users is that essential email ended up going to the Clutter folder. And this is something that is it came as a bit of a surprise to us. And the reason this happened is because they got this atypical mail. And it's something that you don't get very often is something that's once a year, an event notice of some sort, or a notification, a flight notification of some sort for someone that doesn't fly very often. And Clutter looked at that and said, well, this thing has similar characteristics to things that we've classified as clutter in the past, and we're going to go ahead and classify it as clutter. So what we did and are in the process of doing is identifying those new classes of email and putting that together into an inbox notification that asks, are these important to you because they're new, there's something different, we put them into the clutter folder because we do think they're clutter, but at the same time, because they're rare emails, we're not as good at assessing whether that's truly clutter or not. So we have this notification where it describes the new items and item classes that we moved, as well as providing a summary of what's in the clutter folder so that end users are aware of what's going on. They understand that there are these new classes of items. They understand that there are things in the clutter folder that they may want to check occasionally and provide feedback to the system on. And they're aware that this entire process is happening. And this is something that we view as replacing the existing notifications that we have. Today we have some reminders that tell the users, hey, there's stuff going to your clutter folder, you should go check it. Give us feedback if you feel like the feature isn't working for you, that kind of thing. We're replacing those notifications with this because we believe that this is giving much more value to the user, giving much more information to the user, and our goal with these notifications is to do exactly that. The other thing that's on the way is admin controls. So we know that, yes, default enablement is probably the best way to go for the vast majority of customers and the vast majority of organizations, but there are certain organizations that cannot have features like this deployed across the organization. So we're creating these commandlets, or we have actually created these commandlets. They're in the process of deployment that will allow an admin to turn off clutter for any user that hasn't previously selected a setting for that. So actually, in reality, they can override the settings of the end user as well. But the way we recommend running it is the way I've described at the bottom, which is look at the users where they've either turned it off or they have it unset, and it'll show up as they haven't been enabled. And for those users, set it to disabled. And if they're set to disabled, even when we have default enablement, we won't go ahead and turn them on because it's an explicit user or admin on the behalf of a user that turned the feature off. So we'll make sure to not enable that set of users. So let's go ahead and demo that. So if we look at, if we look at the set of mailboxes, or in this case, I'm going to take the mailboxes whose IDs start with S, just to reduce that set, and look at their clutter settings. So we can see that some of them are disabled and some of them are enabled with the is enabled property. we can actually go ahead and run the command for those users that are disabled to go ahead and make them explicitly disabled using the same syntax that I've described. So get clutter, and it just uses the alias. And then for those users who are where is enabled is false, we'll go ahead and set clutter same users to false. It's kind of a weird syntax, but the reason for the syntax is because users that have the unset setting also show up as disabled because that's the way the system treats them. If they haven't explicitly chosen to turn classification on, the system considers them disabled, as well as if they explicitly turned it off. So we can go ahead and do that. And it'll go through and it will set each of those users that are previously disabled or unset to disabled specifically. So we don't need to necessarily see that go through. So what are the things to take away from this? Clutter really greatly benefits end user productivity in a measurable way. I mean, we're actually able to measure their productivity benefits, measure the amount of time that they spend, that they're able to save because of Clutter moving things out to the Clutter folder. The other thing I'd like you guys to take away is that default enablement is something that's coming soon. And there's a lot of preparation that's actually needed to make sure that this is right for your organizations. You should make sure to learn about the feature. And I've talked a little bit about the feature, and I'm happy to answer questions about the feature as well, about how the feature works. The other thing is, in terms of user education, there's some user education that's within the product, but you guys are the best judges for what types of user education work best in your organization. I've heard that time is needed for help desk to actually be trained, and this is one of the reasons why we made sure that during the course of the release, we're doing this gradually. It's not something that we default enabled initially. We wanted to make sure that we invited users to turn it on so that there was a gradual ramp, not just for us in terms of having users on the feature, but for all of your organizations as well, because we wanted to make sure that there's a gradual ramp in terms of people asking questions about the feature. It's because it's something that's fairly new, and it's a new user experience, and it's something, while the benefits are measurable and large, it's something that requires a change to the way end users actually work. The other thing is the notification branding. If that's something that's needed in the organization, notification branding, the retention policy settings, and things like that, please make sure to do it in advance of default enablement, because roughly the rate at which people opt in to the feature, it's roughly 10% in most organizations. Our expectation in terms of what we've seen in terms of default enablement is close to 85, 90%. So the number of users that end up with the Clutter feature on is a lot more than what we have today. So we want to make sure that you're prepared, and if your organizations need to be able to turn off the feature, then that's the reason why we have that commandlet, and we'll make sure that that is deployed and ready for everyone prior to first release, so that you have time to run it and make sure that you're, if we haven't given enough time for your organizations to adopt Clutter, that you have time to do that. I did promise to leave time for questions, so I want to make sure that we do that. I have a few other comments to make, but I want to make sure that I'm addressing the questions that you have first as well. So if anyone wants to step up to the mic.
I got a quick question. When you had your screen up for someone that turns it on the first time, it says your privacy will be protected. We strip away stuff. What exactly are you using of the content of the emails, either the title or the body, to do this that you're stripping away?
So I can't say exactly what, how that is used, but it's used during the weight calculation. So if you think about the way we calculate the features on that email, there's things like the words in the subject or things like that that could be key to the determination of whether something is clutter or not. So we do use those words. We also, when we calculate that, there's a certain amount of stripping away of that information that we do in order to make sure that the information that's personal stays in the mailbox. So even all of the weight calculations and things like that are in a mailbox item. And we view that as one of the differentiating things between us and other companies that do that. We make sure that that information stays in the mailbox because that is the place where all personal information should stay.
But you do read stuff from the subject line and the body.
The way the feature works, it has to calculate features based on that.
Okay.
I mean, think of it like,
no,
like
I wasn't quite sure.
Think of it like search indexing. I mean, search indexing has to take that information in order to develop the index. And the way the feature works is it actually looks at subject lines. I'm not sure about body. That's one of the things that I'm not sure about. I don't believe that that's the case. But for subject lines, for instance, if there are features that are calculated on the basis of those subject lines, we would need to do that.
Okay, thank you.
So how would you compare what Clutter's doing compared to the new Outlook Mobile with the focused inbox?
Got it. So focused inbox is in some ways developed consumer first. So the way they looked at it, they looked at bulk senders and they prioritized that kind of information to push to the other folder. That's just the way they started looking at it. We started looking at it as this is an enterprise problem and this is the way we need to develop a feature set for making it work for the enterprise. We are working with them, and at some point in the near future, I hope, we'll be able to bring together the two feature sets in order to bring the benefits of what they have and the benefits of what we have. Their feature is better about learning speed in the short term because you can say, hey, you know what? Emails from my boss are never clutter. Or emails from my wife are never clutter, and that's something that the system won't necessarily inherently understand. I mean, even emails from your boss, it could get that information from AD for organizations that have that information in AD. Emails from your wife, you can't necessarily understand that that's never clutter initially. So clutter will eventually catch up by learning because you tend to respond to those emails, you tend to read those emails, eventually, over the course of time, it'll have that where the Outlook for iOS rule set gets it instantly. So there is a happy marriage of the two feature sets at some point, hopefully in the near future.
Is there any plan to make some version of Clutter available for on-prem environments if we're not connected to Office 365 or the cloud? Because it sounds like it's learning from your organization and from the individual. Is there any chance of getting it for an on-prem only version?
Great question. I was hoping someone would ask that. I did mention earlier that I'm part of Kareem's team, and he was one of the people who presented at the Exchange Server 2016 talk. He is pushing us to make sure that we have some version of Clutter that works really well in on-premises. I can't say when that'll happen because honestly, right now, the way we're shipping features into the service implementation every week. And that's not something that you can really accommodate within an on-premises environment. I mean, literally things like the reply to were checked in a week and a half ago. We make changes to the feature calculations and so on. We make those on a fairly regular basis and weekly to monthly. And until that cadence slows down to the point where we feel like we can deliver a good experience to on-premises through the CU process or the normal vehicles for on-premises delivery, we don't feel like we can ship it to on-premises yet. But it is our intention to bring it to on-premises at the point that we feel like we can do that.
You mentioned that it sometimes takes about 2 weeks for you to train, to learn habits and everything.
Yep. So if we go back to the slide about the way it works, I mentioned that we don't look at emails that are newer than 1 week. If you think about it, it takes at least a week to learn that information because we don't know what action you're going to take on that message. We can't anticipate it. So if we reduce that time down to a much shorter amount of time, then we risk having an action happen after that period and having come to the wrong conclusion. Like supposing you ignore an email for 3 days and you end up replying to it once you have the answer to that. We want to make sure that we capture that reply, and we figure that a week is roughly the right amount of time to use for that. It also goes back to the question around Outlook for iOS and Android. That part of it learns really quickly, right? Because we ask, in Outlook for iOS and Android, we ask explicit questions. Hey, is this Clutter? Hey, is this not Clutter? Is this always Clutter? And so on. Those aspects of it learn really quickly. So at some point when we're able to marry the two features together, we'll be able to trade off the quick learning speed and discriminative ability of Outlook for iOS, the focused inbox implementation, versus the ability of Clutter to capture. I mean, Clutter's strength is really that it's able to capture information that you don't even know. So it's got a set of tens of features. And in that feature set, some combination of things, you end up treating that not as Clutter. And sometimes it's amazing. There was actually an email that I received in my inbox. I could not figure out why Clutter thought it was not Clutter. But it really wasn't Clutter. It was really something that I needed to take action on. It was about workflows that run in the service, and something about my past behavior led it to believe that that was not Clutter. And it put it in my inbox, and I was really happy about it because I was able to take action on it, and it was something that otherwise would have led to consequences that I really didn't want to have happen. So I was happy about it, but I could not have written rules in order to make that happen. Mm-hmm. So that's where Clutter's strengths really lie.
And for any reason, would you shut off Clutter and then turn it back on to reset yourself?
That's something that people have asked for. The challenge that we have is that resetting is actually a tricky concept here because Clutter doesn't reset to 0. It takes a certain amount of learning to get to the point where it's able to well discriminate between clutter and non-clutter. So even if you reset it to 0, what it ends up doing is waiting for a period of time, looking at the training data, and looking at a different set of email than when you first turned it on. So when you first turned it on, it had a set of email that it was aware of. And supposing 3 months later, you think it's not working for you and you want to reset it. The email that it would look at 3 months into the future is not the same set of email that it will look at now. So we're kind of struggling with what reset means and how to bring some sort of reset to the end user. That's something that we'll figure out how to do that, and we'll make sure that turning it off and on or some explicit admin action is able to make that happen. But that's something that we've been thinking about. We just haven't found a good solution to yet.
And is there one methodology better than the other to use OWA versus the client? I know that all of it works, and just dragging and dropping is really all you need to do.
Yeah, no,
is one more effective than the other?
No, there's no difference in effectiveness. The only difference is in the things that I pointed out around the user experience. So, for instance, in Outlook, there's quick steps that are moved to Clutter. In older versions of Outlook, the Outlook 2016 has a right click. It just makes it more streamlined. Okay. But in terms of the user signals, they're all equivalent.
My last question, I promise. Is there any opt-out for larger organizations that want to avoid communication to their users directly from Microsoft where we have communication restrictions?
So this is something that I've been asked, and it's something that I've been trying to understand. I know large organizations have communications restrictions, but in some sense, this is not really a communication in that same sense, because it's just like quota messages or delivery status notifications. It's something that comes from the system that tells the end user what the status of this system is with respect to their mailbox. So I'm not sure how we can turn that off and still provide the experience that we want to for the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we worked with our Tame just recently to turn that off, and there was a way that they made that happen. I was just
got it.
So
the turn it off part, I can speak to that because I'm usually the one that does those check-ins. The turn it off part was specifically around invitations. So we had invitations because we wanted to let users know that they are good candidates for the feature and that they should go ahead and turn it on. That's something that is sort of a value add. It doesn't really come from Microsoft. It's something that comes from the system as the system identifies the user as a good candidate for Clutter. In a month, that will basically be moot because the way that the system will react to that is by turning Clutter on for that user.
Thank you.
Just want to make sure. I still have a little bit of time. Other questions?
I do.
Oh, go ahead.
So currently, the Clutter folder is only created when a user opts into having the Clutter feature available?
Yes and no.
So I've had some users that are like, I have a Clutter folder, where did it come from? And they say they didn't turn it on.
So yes and no. The way the Clutter folder gets created is the same process that goes through and identifies a user as being a good candidate for Clutter, in that the Clutter feature is able to discriminate between Clutter and non-Clutter for that user. We'll actually create a Clutter folder for that user. It's really a default folder like the deleted items folder, and our view is that that folder should just be there. So when default enablement happens, as part of that process, everyone will get a Clutter folder.
So I think too, as an administrator, whatever rationale you guys use to send out these invitations, I as an administrator get a question saying, I got this email, but how come nobody else around me got it? And so it's difficult for me to explain that. So that's, I think, something to think about.
Yeah, that's something that we've struggled with, and that's one of the reasons why we've selectively, as organizations have asked us to turn off the invitations, why we've turned those invitations off, because we understand that it causes more chaos in some organizations than others. The challenge with that is that since the system really identifies, I mean, we don't know, and you guys as administrators don't really know when the system learns the ability to discriminate between clutter and non-clutter. So it's sort of onerous. I mean, one possible thing that we could do is send you guys emails with lists of users that say, oh, these are the users that should be turning clutter on. But that just seems like busy work and not really something that you want to be handling, especially if you think about clutter as one of many features in Office 365. It would just be crazy for an individual administrator to send out invitations to every user saying, you should turn this on, and you should turn this on, and you should turn this on. So we may not have figured out the exact balance between how we make the system tell the user that they should turn it on and having the administrator send out a blanket broadcast email to turn on the feature. I'm not sure we found the exact right balance for that, but
so an
that's
initial
something that
way would be as a first end email to the admins, because you have that in the tenant, who the admin or admins group is that, hey, we're going to be doing this, and some users may, there are things out there. I think just a general overview of how it's going to be, your users would be invited, or however that process is going to be working while you're piloting it.
That makes sense. That makes sense, and that's feedback that we got, and I don't know if you guys had an opportunity to attend the change management talk, but this is one of the things that, because of the learnings from the Clutter rollout, I've been participating in the Change Management Council for Office 365. So we're trying to figure out a way to make sure that administrators are aware of this type of thing happening.
Oh, and is that branding mailbox out there in every tenant already?
No, it basically is a mailbox that you can create, and you add that SMTP, that GUID at tenant. If you add that address to it, that's the branding mailbox.
So when you create the mailbox, you just create a shared mailbox then?
You can create a shared mailbox. You can create a resource mailbox. I mean, something that doesn't need a license. We don't really look at the type of the mailbox. We just pull the information off of the mailbox.
All right.
Is there any reporting available? I'm a number and statistics guy. I like to watch trending. Is there any reporting that admins can look at to see what users are doing with it, if they're struggling with anything, as well as just seeing how effective it is for everyone?
So I would love to have feedback on the kind of reporting that you would like to see. We have reporting internally, but the challenge that I have is that when we talked about exposing the reporting that we have internally at the tenant level, some of the other people in the organization are like, no, nobody wants to see that reporting. That's not useful. I disagree, but if you guys tell me what kind of reporting that you'd like to see, I can make sure that type of reporting is on the roadmap.
All right, excellent.
Hi, I have two questions. The one question is for instance, if you have extra folders and you have rules on it, is Clutter taking those mails also in consideration for analyzing, or is it only for the default inbox?
It is only for the default inbox. So Clutter actually runs after rules, which means that only the emails that land in the inbox are processed by Clutters. if you have rules that move things out of the inbox, Clutter will respect that and not do anything with those.
Okay, and the second question is about where is it stored within the mailbox? Do we have folder associated items, or is it in the message root folder or in the root?
So Clutter itself is a folder. The information about the weights and the threshold and so on is actually in a folder associated item.
Of the Clutter folder or in the top information store?
I believe it's the top of the information store.
Okay, thank you.
So a good source of information on that is Tony Redmond has an ebook on Exchange. That's a good information source. The other is Glenn Scales. He has an Exchange blog. That's another good source for that information.
I have seen this. I just want to make sure that not missing anything, because switching every month, whatever, improving the service, that's why. Always the changes.
Got it.
Thanks.
In terms of change management, how does Clutter deal with it when somebody inherits someone else's information from their inbox?
So think of, we don't specifically look at that scenario, but if you think about the role change scenario, so the one I talked about where I changed from being a program manager on the search team to a program manager on the Clutter team, it's very similar. So over the course of a few weeks, it will actually learn what that person's preferences are and start sorting things out. As long as the user knows that Clutter is on and starts moving things appropriately, it'll adapt.
What about in instances where a person inherits a role but maintains their existing role?
Maintains their existing
Role.
Again, it'll learn in a couple of weeks. Okay. So as the situation changes, it's basically a learning feature. Okay. So as the situation changes, it'll learn what the preferences are, what the new preferences are.
Okay, and then they just react. So if they received content that their Clutter learning doesn't recognize and considers Clutter but really isn't, they just go to their Clutter box and Clutter folder and check.
So they just go to the Clutter folder, check that there's something in Clutter. If it's not Clutter, then move it to the inbox, and it'll learn from that.
Okay, thank you.
Awesome.
I have one more, sorry.
One more, okay.
So is Clutter only for users, or will Clutter also be available in shared mailboxes?
Clutter is only for users.
Okay.
It is not available in shared mailboxes. Okay, well, thank you all for coming, and hopefully I've answered questions.